Welcome back. Welcome for the first time. Welcome to the first meeting of our 2024-25 workshop in the history of material text. I'm hoping that those of you joining us on Zoom can hear me. If you can't, start waving frantically and we'll see. But we have a whole new tech set up in the room here, so that should, if it doesn't break, solve some of the problems we were having last year with people having a difficult time hearing on Zoom. The mics pick up everything really well, so that often means if you're in the room, people may hear you better than you think. So be aware if you're whispering to your neighbor. I'm Zach Lesser. I'm a professor in the English department, and I run this seminar along with Jerry Singerman, who's humanities editor emeritus at the Penn Press, Don Pollock, curator in the Kislak Center, and a special welcome to our new Brisbane Schoenberg Fellow in the History of Material Text, Peter Diamond. Peter will be keeping everything running smoothly this year. He's already done that all afternoon today, and has gotten us up and running with our new tech here. He'll be sending you emails and, of course, managing our frequent diner points at Sankey. He also should be sending around a sign-in sheet. We'd love to have you just put your name down. We don't keep track of anything, but it's just in case we ever get asked to account for our uses of funds. If you're not on our email list and would like to be on our listserv, you can just add your email to that list. You can also go to our website, pennmaterialtext.org or .com, pennmaterialtext.com. You try them both, and there's a link, pennmaterialtext.org, and there's a link there to get on the sign-in sheet. If you on the listserv, if you're on our listserv, you'll get like 2 emails a week. It's nothing onerous. At the beginning of the year, I'd like to thank the deans of the School of Arts and Sciences for generously funding this workshop. I'd like to thank Sean Quimby and everyone in the Kislak Center for hosting us here, and everyone who makes this possible for us to be in this room every week at 5:15. As you may know, this workshop was founded in January 1993 by Peter Stallygrass, who will be presenting to the group as always this spring. And this means we'll be entering our 32nd year when we start the spring semester. Pretty amazing. It's the longest running and I think most influential seminar in the field of material texts. Sparked similar groups at many institutions around the world, including Cambridge. It sparked the material text monograph series at Penn Press. And in general, I think it's made Penn the place to be, in this room, at the press, in the Kislak Center, in our PhD programs for the study of book history. I say all that because it's nothing to do with me. It's to do with Peter and the seminar, everyone who's presented to it.
Sorry,
yeah.
Before you introduce, I wanted to say a couple things about events.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, hi everybody. The Zoom people don't need to see me, so welcome to the Kislak Center. Many returning folks, but maybe some new faces, so that's great. Part of the seminar, of course, is having actual materials on display. So there's some spectacular things here, and some of you already had a chance to look. Apology, Zoom, that's one. We can't share that with you in quite the same way. You're welcome to take photographs, including Professor Moretti's own personal books, which are on that side of the table. Tonight, because of the fragility of these things, it's a preferably no-touch scenario. She can touch her books, and we can do that later. You also, those in the room, have a handout for the events of the semester at the Kislak Center and Penn Libraries here. Please help spread the word. This is just the kickoff of the semester, and I just wanted to say one thing in particular, due to some wonderful synergy, which we'll say we planned it, but we're not exactly sure how we planned it. This is a whole week of movability. After tonight's talk on Thursday, you will be able to attend, I hope you can, the opening of our exhibit in the gallery right around the corner, which is on movable books, and it's called The Movement of Books. So lots of moving around. So calisthenics and books are combined here. That's that event, which will have talked by Ellen Rubin, is on Thursday at 5:30 in this space and in the gallery over there. Lynn is reminding me about an event on Friday.
Friday is from the Kiss-Like Stack.
One of our first in our series of online only monthly talks called From the Kiss-Like Stacks, which you're welcome to attend. And Friday's topic is by Regan Cladstrup on Emma Bell Miles, the author of Broke My Heart. So that's Friday, September 13th, noon, Zoom only. Catch us later if you have questions. Over back to Zach.
Thanks, John. Okay, so this seminar, I think Peter would be the first to acknowledge, began largely as a workshop on the history of the book in Europe and America, focused on classics, the Renaissance, and American literature. But it's expanded over time to a very broad range of global work across disciplines and methodologies. And that increasingly global reach is obviously on display today in our first meeting with Professor Laura Moretti of the University of Cambridge. Professor Moretti works on early modern Japanese literature, which for those of us in Europe, I'll say means roughly 17th and 19th century, which is a different time period than my early modern. She did her undergraduate degree and her PhD at kufū, the University of Venice, and studied it as well at the University of Tokyo. And she's taught, speaking of global book history and book historian, she's taught not only at kufū in Cambridge, where she's been since 2012, but at Keio University, Leiden University, Leuven University, Ritsumeikan University, and Japan Women's University, which I think has the first volume of Shakespeare. But I know personally. Professor Moretti's work focuses particularly on popular literature. Her first English language book was Recasting the Past in Early Modern Tales of Issei for Children from Brill, a textual study and reception history of a 1766 picture book version of the canonical Tales of Issei. Her second book was Pleasure and Profit, which I love as a title, kind of sums up like a lot of the work, a lot of the theory of bookselling that we've had over the years here. Popular prose in 17th century Japan from Columbia. It was shortlisted for the DeLong Book History Prize from Sharp. One of my popular cultural studies heroes, Peter Burke, called it an exemplary study that challenges conventional wisdom in her choice of texts, her treatment of genre, and her comparative approach. Our own Linda Chance reviewed it as an intensely learned guide through a forest of underappreciated popular prose books, which is great because it makes you sound like Virgil. Today's presentation will be on playful books, books that are engineered for action with movable parts. And as such, this talk also participates in one of our occasional and very non-systematic mini themes that we like to have. And this year, a number of the presentations will focus on textual substrates, often paper, but not always. Not always will relate, but a bunch of them do, and we hope that this mini theme will enable further cross-cultural and cross-disciplinary comparison and conversation. So please join me in welcoming Professor Moretti to the workshop.
For having me here today. I'm quite nervous. I admired this group over the years. I've read Professor Stanley's scholarship avidly, so it's quite an honor to be here. And I would also like to thank Professor Julie Nelson-Davis and Professor Linda Chance for always having inspired me over the course of 10 years now. And thank you very much for making this possible. So we're talking about 1810 today. And 1810 proves to be a very significant year in the history of the book in Japan. By this point in time, the book industry was a well-oiled machine with 200 years under its belt. Commercial publishers thrived in the major urban centers, including Edo, nowadays Tokyo, and moved by the desire of ever greater financial gain, publishers worked effectively with creative teams made of authors, illustrators, calligraphers, and block cutters. The woodblock technology was skillfully deployed to create exciting products, many multimodal, in that meaning was produced by the combination of text, images, and the acoustic. So what do I view as so significant in 1810? In this year, 2 experiments brought a new exciting dimension to the printed. Mechanical and visual devices are added, asking readers to manually interact with parts of the book, and in doing so, to effect change. These are books engineered for what is trumpeted in the titles as Hayagawari, quick changes. They are engineered for action. My talk today explores these 2 commercial experiments, and I start with Hayagawari mune no karakuri, the mechanisms of the human heart in quick change format, and then move on to Hayagawari kufū no adauchi, a revenge story in quick change format. I interrogated the material qualities of these books with a view to understand how their design enables manual interaction and how manual interaction shapes meaning, complicating the very act of reading. In the process, I touch upon how the paratextual apparatus in both objects invoke mediatic cross-pollinations with the world of the kabuki theatre, mechanical dolls and toys. And I conclude by touching upon the rich tradition of movable books that they inspired, and by briefly situating this talk into my new wider project. And my talk will last about 40 minutes. Let's start with Hayagawari mune no karakuri, and I will refer to it as the mechanisms of the human heart, so no Japanese. The author is Shikitei Samba. He was an entrepreneur and a writer, and those who came to the summer school in paleography read a great deal about his products, but today we are looking at his more writers, production as a writer. And the illustrator is a giant in the world of ukiyo-e, Utagawa Toyokuni. Samba and Toyokuni's sustained partnership led to 77 titles produced together between 1794 and 1827, some issued posthumously. And here, in a book that is also on that table, you can see Utagawa Toyokuni and Shikitei Samba together. The image is from 1810, and they are endearing themselves to their fans. In his diary, which is also dated 1810, Samba described his own Hayagawari mune no karakuri as a big hit or a fan. And this is no exaggeration when we consider the publication history of this book. In the interest of time, I have laid out the details in the handout, which Peter very kindly printed out for you. So when you go home, you can peruse all the details. But you will see 3 editions. The first, with blocks cut in 1810, was used for multiple reprints. The 1844 edition offers a facsimile of the 1810 edition and was reprinted with additions in 1853. And the 1853 edition, the original is on the table over there. And then there is an 1843 edition from completely redesigned blocks. What is interesting for us today is that both the 1810 and the 1844 editions were designed with flaps, and the 1843 edition has no movable components from day one. So what is the mechanisms of the human heart about? There is no narrative. The text is organized in 7 discrete episodes, which are labeled 7 roles, nana yaku. Each episode presents us with a pair, 2 human types. One transforms into the other. The book is about transformation, changes. An apprentice turns into a clerk. A youth turns into an oldie, and so on. The text is almost entirely made of speech. Each human type is talking. Dialogues with other intradiegetic characters or monologues draw the extradiegetic reader into their thoughts and the feelings of each type. We hear what goes on in their mind, we hear about their foibles, and in doing so, we learn about the mechanisms of their heart, as advertised in the title. Not only we hear their voices, we also see them. Each type is presented to us visually. And each type appears in front of us just like an actor would do on stage, performing his own or her own role. The choice of the word nanayaku as part of the subtitle is quite telling. And you can see here a very rare wrapper of this book, which survives at the Saga University Library. And it contains the subtitle within it, Nanayaku. So Nanayaku is interesting because it conjures up the world of the kabuki theatre. Near the time of the publication of Samba's work under scrutiny here, staging a leading actor playing multiple roles, so same actor playing multiple roles, and doing so very often in quick succession, Hayagawari, had become a cherished device to turn a kabuki production into a hit. In the 1781 production of one of the staple play in the kabuki theatre, The Treasury of Loyal Retainers, that was played at Moritaza Theatre, actor Ichikawa Danzo was praised for playing 7 roles, as indicated in this playbill. In 1801, at the Nakamura-za Theatre, Danzo also marveled the audience for his quick change from Yoichibei to Sadakuro in Act 5. And I will show you a little clip. It's very dark, but it's also a very rare clip that shows you how these quick changes would have been done. Hopefully it will move. So what you see here is Nakamura Kanjiro III. He's performing all the Yoichibei. He's sitting in front of a bale of rice, and something takes him inside the bale of rice. And just a few seconds later, you will see that he's outside. That's not the same actor. The same actor is now playing Sadakuro. All is done by the same actor in just a few seconds. This is Hayagawari, and this was a big hit at the time. The unprecedented success of Ichikawa Danzo was trumpeted in a number of books, as you can see here. And Samba mentions him in the introduction to his Mechanisms of the Human Heart. So Samba is telling us that he's trying to remediate on the printed page the idea of someone changing from one role to another. What is more, and indeed of interest for us today, is that the book is designed in a way that invites and enables us, the reader, to enact these role changes in our own hands by interacting with the book's engineered design. Let's see how. We have the first double page spread after the list of contents. It displays a man on the right and a woman on the left, and they are surrounded by bodies in various outfits and wigs. The text weaves in words that invite us to manually intervene on this figure. By using paper, scissors, and glue, you can fabricate your own quick-changing dolls. And this is precisely what part of the subtitles suggests. And I go back to the wrapper, where we read that this is a Kirinuki Ehon, a decoupage book. If you were to intervene on the figurine of the man, and I'm doing it digitally, you could execute in quick succession what the verbal text says. The demon-like debt collector that comes around on the last day of the year, getting all your money, morphs into the respectful guest who comes around to greet you on the first day. And if you were to do it, you just overlay the new outfit, and here you have the person who comes and greets you. Here, Samba remediates in book format 3 types of ephemera that can be positioned within the ecology of playthings that have bloomed in early modern Japan. And today I will just mention 2. First are decoupage prints that were inspired by the kabuki theatre, and that translated into paper the very idea of the multiple roles in quick succession. As these very rare examples, which is kept at the Tabako to Shiona in Tokyo, shows, the idea is simple. You have the body shape and the face of kabuki actor Ichikawa Danjuro and 5 different attires. By cutting the 5 dresses and overlaying them on top of Danjuro's figurine, you get 5 quick changes of the actor, each pointing to a famous role that he played on stage. The print remediates the wizardry of a stage performer on paper and enables everyone who owns the print in a pair of scissors to reenact the stage performance and its quick change effects. Second are prints that Samba calls Hayagawari dissects. And it's seems to me that they're quite similar to the 1810, The History and Adventure of Little Henry, and the 1814 Cinderella of the Little Glass Slipper. These prints gave you a body and various outfits that you could cut out and use to change your figure. And Zach was saying before that as a kid, he used to play that. And indeed, also Samba mentions that he as a kid, would use them to play. And I come back to this idea of kid versus adults in my conclusive remarks. Now, only much later examples, unfortunately, survive from Japan, and I have a few there uncut for you. The idea is that they work exactly the same. You cut your outfit and then place it on top of the head. Samba mentions in the introduction to the mechanisms of the human heart that he saw them as a child, and that Utagawa Toyokuni, his fellow illustrator, had just recently revitalized that tradition. So you can see that everything that was really hit on the kabuki stage, outside the kabuki stage, gets included by Samba in his introduction and suggested that he's remediating that in book format. Samba appropriates this ludic culture of manual play, remediates it in book format, and uses this remediation to entice his reader to think that the book will allow them to interact manually with the printed surface, enabling movement in the form of quick changes. If we go back to Samba's spread, we will notice a body wrapped in a bale of rice, and this is the visual clue to the quick changes Ichikawa Danzuro was famous for in the clip we saw. Needless to say, and this in turn suggests the tantalizing idea that by cutting these figurines, we are recreating in our hands the quick changes that Danzo was performing on stage. Needless to say, this is not really possible in practical terms. To cut the figurines, you need first to cut the thread that keeps the folios bound, separate each folio, and then cut the figurines. I have no proof that this does not happen, but the presence of one of the clothes across the gutter, therefore printed on two separate folios, suggests that Samba in this spread was just gesturing towards manual play. We turn the page, and we are presented with what appears to be the realization of a decoupage print that has been cut and assembled. Yet something is odd. The body of a man, Sadakuro, whom we saw previously in the coming out of the day rice, is combined with the head of the female heroine, Okaru. And the same happens to Okaru's kimono, combined with Sadakuro's head. The reader cannot act manually, but these two figures trigger a mental image of how manual play could end up in almost preposterous combinations. Just imagine dressing Henry with Cinderella cloak. As I view it, this double-page spread triggers the memory of manual play and positions the reader firmly in the realm of comedy. Mentally prepared to manual play, the reader turns the page to finally be offered the opportunity to interact with the book and to use movable flats to enact quick change. This is the verso of the fifth folio. The image of a party in a pleasure quarter dominates the upper half of the page. In the bottom half, the narration describes human beings as creatures moved by desires, and the text points to what awaits those who are excessively and obsessively absorbed in lust and drinking. After today, you will not want to drink too much. We're promised a change, a quick change caused by being lost in the world of the living. At this point, there is an instruction to operate the book. Have a look by yourself by turning this upside down. We realize that this text is printed on a flat that can and indeed needs to be turned up to reveal the change caused by the unbridled indulgence in pleasure. Everyone in the party rapidly transforms into sex. Under the flap, a new text is revealed, a text that is printed on the underlying folio. We read about horrible activities between a man and a woman are nothing but the embrace of two purified bodies reduced to bones. And we enlighten what we are supposed to enlighten to the reality behind the human surface. They're all the same, nothing but a bunch of bones. Here, Samba draws inspiration from a book published the previous year, and as far as we know, this was the very first book that contained any flap ever. This is 1809. It was written by Santo Kyoden. There was a great deal of rivalry between Kyoden and Samba, and crucially, it was illustrated by the same artist that Samba is working with, Toyoku. Kyoden had inserted a flap in one of the introductory pictures of this text. A young, healthy prostitute is printed on the flap, and when the flap is pulled up and open, the woman turns into a skeleton printed on the underlying folio. Now, this flap actually is very interesting because it plays on a very long tradition of books devoted to a type of meditation that involved looking at a body decompose in front of you. So actually, this flap has a lot of textual scholarship behind it by Kyoden. But what Samba does is to repurpose Kyoden's idea to frame his own work as a text that stages change. The next folio, the sixth, in Samba's work is a masterpiece of book engineering. It is designed to enable a highly interactive reading experience where it is the reader's action in operating the multiple flaps that drives the narrative, the very little narrative there. So this is a recto of the first edition, the 1810 edition. We start with all the flaps closed. The figure of a shop apprentice dominates the visual field. The upper half shows the naughty face of a very young boy, and a lower part shows his leg partially hidden by a table, and his left hand is holding an abacus. Can you all see the abacus? These are printed on two flaps. The flaps are glued to the upper and the lower edges. We read that the apprentice's name is Takejiro. The voice of Takejiro doing his maths turns quickly into a yawn, followed by a good moan about his boss, the shop clerk. And there comes the lady of the house. After a short banter, she draws attention to something that is not quite right. What you have there? Standing there like a rabbit in the headlight. The dialogue continues by vividly portraying the woman trying to see what the boy is hiding. And the last lines make us wonder what the woman has discovered. Look at that! I knew it! Oh, I'm so sorry. At this point, we find an instruction that asks us to open the flap at the bottom. We do so by pulling the flap down. And when we do as we are told, the image changes and also reveals. The naughty boy has been eating a watermelon, which is hiding at his feet. This is printed on the underlying folio. The apprentice's hand is now pulling up the hem of his kimono so that the offending crime is unveiled. The upper part of the body is unchanged. The same naughty face that is printed on the upper flap is now replete with new meaning. We know why he is very naughty. The boy has indeed been naughty by eating what he shouldn't have been eating. But it is by interacting with the book that the suspense, which was built by the dialogue, is released, resulting in an amusing visual surprise. And this visual surprise happens quickly if you were to do it with the book. And I did a mock-up, and you can do it there, right? You just put it there. The quick change is realized in our hands, by our hands. Once we have read the brisk conversation that follows, here comes another instruction. After reading this, return the lower bottom to its original position, then you open the upper bit and the image will change into the sky. And here we are. The image of the desk in the lower part is recombined with a new upper half printed on the underlying folio, which displays the body of an older man, the clerk, holding in his right hand the same, the account book. But his left hand is the same as before, with the abacus being put down. By opening the flap, the reader enables a new scene to start. Unless you open the flap, a new scene will not start in the book. By turning the page, we then move to an episode that stages the change from a youth to an oldie. A young stylish man is sitting in the upper half of the page. To turn this young man into an old man, we need to operate two flaps. First, following Samba's instruction, we need to pull down the back of the flap that was hanging from the top of the rector of the sixth folio. I could not really make it easier, but here you can see the naughty boy, at the back there is text, you pull it down. Okay. And when you do that, you start reading the voice of the old man. There is a monologue that starts there. Yet the old man is not visible to us here. And Samba leaves us no instruction on what to do. It is up to the reader, operator of the book, to figure out what to do. We may have noticed that on the back of the flap at the bottom of the previous scene, there was the body of a man upside down. And that is precisely our old man. And to make him appear, we need to operate the flap, making it rest on the verso of the sixth folio. So again, with my mock-up, there was an old man here. I just do this. At that point, both flaps would have covered the verso of the sixth folio. At this point, we are reading the rest of the monologue of this old man. At that point, there is another instruction that promises a new change. Leave the upper bit as it is and open downward. This elderly man will lead to another change, we are told. And indeed, we now find a boy that appears in front of us, and we hear his voice grousing about the garrulous nature of the old man. The sixth folio of the Mechanisms of the Human Heart asks readers to do something more than read in the traditional sense of the word. Readers are asked to play with the flaps. They are asked to operate the book. It is the reader's manual interventions that allow the protagonists of the story to appear and disappear. The visual transformations thus performed by the reader generate movement, at least the illusion of movement, on the printed page. As a result, the printed page turns into a stage. Similarly to what happened on a kabuki stage, we see the actors entering the scene and we hear their voices. Differently from a real stage, though, it is the audience, here the reader, come operator of the book, that moves the characters. There is another layer to Samba's book. As we move beyond the sixth folio, we find scattered in various episodes short passages that tell us how to read aloud the words uttered by the human types and printed on the page. We are instructed on how to perform these lines. For the mother-in-law, we are asked to speak in a very soft and coaxing voice. For the strong man, we are asked to roll our tongue. This suggests a form of reading that implies a performance. We are not simply reading aloud, we are performing the lines as if we were on stage. And this makes me surmise that the Mechanisms of the Human Heart is designed as a book that could be used as a prop to effect the ultimate change from readers of a printed text to performers of a spoken text. The 1853 edition, which I have with you today, does contain the same flaps. The flap on the verso of the sixth folio, so the one with the skeletons, and there is also one on the last folio, which I didn't touch on today, work exactly like those in the first edition. But those of the sixth folio are inserted differently. And at first, I thought that it was just a copy that I managed to buy, but I have identified another example of the same edition at Doshisha University in Kyoto, and it is exactly the same. So the flap with the desk and the abacus is glued onto the flap with Takejiro's cheeky face. As such, I can either display the clerk or Takejiro and the watermelon at his feet. Either way, the flaps are there, but they are not positioned to enable the effect of surprise described in conjunction with the first edition. Also, Samba's instructions are now redundant. They really not work, and still they are there.
Yeah.
The flap with the old man's monologue is pasted onto the flap, displaying the image of the old man. And this actually unexpectedly works quite well, because after reading the man word, which are printed on the lower part of the flag at this point, then we need to turn the flag to continue reading his monologue. And at that point, we see both the old man and the young boy together. And by being seen at the same time, this makes the boy's act of being more meaningful, it seems to be. But here again, Samba's instructions are irrelevant. So it might be a very naive point to make, but the comparison of the 1810 edition and the 1853 edition suggests that the placement of the flags, not only the presence of the flags, determines a very different reading experience. Let's see now what happens in Hayagawari kufū no adauchi. I would call it a revenge story. The creative team is different. Kentei Gokuzan, is the author, and Kitagatsu Kimaro is the illustrator. Much less famous than Samba and Koiku. The two projects, though, have one person in common, and that is the block cutter, Kikuchi Mohe. Kikuchi Mohe was actually Samba's father. So the exchange of information about the two projects could have happened via the block cutter, although we have sadly no evidence to support this idea. There is only one edition of this book and only 3 surviving copies, 2 in public institutions and 1 in a private collection. And today I'm using heavily the National Diet Library. That is because it also contains flaps, although I will not really be concentrating on the flaps on this book. So let's see a little bit of the title. Hayagawari now makes perfect sense. We are going back to the idea of the changes. The word adauchi points to a vendetta tale, which by this point in time were extremely popular. The word kufū, which I have barely translated in my English, denotes something that has been carefully devised after attentive thought. And to me, this aligns with the idea of an engineered book design. The subtitle, which is displayed on the cover, gestures towards the tradition of mechanized dolls. The choice of the word sumori no zaiku points to moving dolls activated by coil springs and other inner mechanisms. They were best known as karakuri dolls, so you can still appreciate them in festivals in Japan. And they were associated to the Takeda family, and more precisely to the engineering skills of Takeda Omi. And Takeda Omi is invoked on the cover as a play on the publisher's name, Omiya Komuro. So the book is framed as something akin to Takeda's mechanical doll, something engineered to enable movement, but not with coils and inner mechanisms, with paper. A revenge story differs from the mechanisms of the human heart in that it is a piece of sustained narrative prose where text and image co-create meaning. It is a 10-folio graphic narrative. We've just published a new edited volume on graphic narratives in early modern Japan, and we have a few chapters about these 19th century early modern graphic narratives, and we make a point about the fact that their plots are infamously complex. Our revenge story is no different, but please do allow me to indulge in the plot, just because the text is not translated into English and most likely will never be. The storyline revolves around 4 revenges. One is initiated by Kuro. Let's remember his name, Kuro. Kuro is particularly angry because his father was killed in battle by Kozakura Kanebito. His plan is to end the Kozakura family. How? By stealing the scroll containing the Kozakura family tree in possessions of the widow, Midori, and by ensuring that Saohime, their daughter, will never ever marry. Kuro manages indeed to kidnap Saohime and to snatch the precious scroll. At this point, retainer Shigetayu appears, and his son Itogoro. They manage to track down Kuro's whereabouts. They free Saohime, but Shigetayu is killed first day. Itogoro is eager to vindicate his father, but of course he needs to ensure Saohime's safety first. And he entrusts her to Momosaku, who is another retainer of the family. Now, Momosaku, Kuro hides nearby and kills Momosaku, who betrays his presence. Second day. Kasumi, who is Momosaku's daughter, takes Aohime to her brothers, Umezo, who lives in Kyoto, with his wife, Wakatsu. Kuro happens to be at their place, and Wakatsu unfortunately makes the mistake to let him run away, and therefore decides to take her own life for atonement. Third day. Meanwhile, Saohime is rescued and taken back home, which leaves everyone else, Itogoro, Umezo, and Kasumi, able to focus on their vendetta. The vendetta happens by a formal duel, where you can see everyone is having a go at Kuro. You might be very happy to know that for a graphic narrative, they needed a happy ending. They were published at the new year. Therefore, Kuro is killed and Saohime happily married. Now, how is the book designed to spice up the reading experience? A clue is found on the cover again. We read, follow the instructions provided by the matching marks. Awase jirushi. That's the first time I ever saw this word being used. And the image will transform. To do so, you must bend the pages following the lines that have been provided. We are promised yet another movable print object that requires reader to interact with it to effect visual transformations. As I said before, the book does contain some flaps, like the mechanisms of the human heart, but there is another dimension that was not present in Samba's book, and it is on that dimension that I would like to focus. Outside the printed frame, there are the marks that they are talking about, the awase jirushi. You can see here that there is a round mark and there is a square. They should not be there. They were not there in any graphic narrative produced at the time. There are also instructions on what happens when you use these marks. Any reader is free to ignore such marks and to peruse the book as a normal graphic narrative. Yet this choice would lead to a rather dull reading experience. Compared to contemporaneous graphic narratives, in fact, the plot lacks complexity, believe it or not. This is a very dull plot. And the verbal text moves rather slowly with a disturbing number of repetitions. The pleasure of this text clearly lies elsewhere. Differently from Samba's work, there are no clear instructions on what to do when, in order to do what. It is entirely down to the reader to work out how to operate the book. So the first thing you have to do with this book is actually sit down and try to solve the puzzle. You have to understand what by doing what will happen. Let's see the example from the first double-page spread. We read the text, which is in green, and we learn that Midori, the widow, is talking to her retainer, Shigetayu, revealing her plan to marry her daughter to continue the family line. The narrator tells us that overhearing this conversation is a thief, Kuro. Kuro is not to be seen here. You can only see Midori and Shigetayu talking. The text tells us that Shigetayu's son is arranging a secret meeting of Saohime, the daughter's beloved Harukaze. And Harukaze is not to be seen here. So where are they? The book is engineered so that the reader makes them appear manually. After having read all the instructions outside the printed frame, we realize what our options are. First, we need to deal with the shape, the square-shaped diacritic mark. It urges us to fold the first folio along the line so that the square-shaped marks lay adjacent. And by doing so, we receive the opening of the story. So let's do that. I made a mock-up of the National Library, and what we see is that all at a sudden Kuro appears eavesdropping to the left. Then we need to engage with another set of instructions by aligning the two round-shaped diacritic marks. And the instruction indeed promises a second change, Nineteenth-Century. This can be done actually in two ways. Either in this compact mode, where only the closed sliding doors and a veranda are shown, no one is to be seen, or in a manner that reveals more. And I'm doing again, just aligning the round shapes. And what we see is that Shigetayu going to see Saohime, and again, Kuro on the left. It is important to note that when we do this, when we operate the book by folding the pages, we are no more in a position to read the text. The text is covered by the bits of paper that should not be there. And this is very different from Samba's book. Having examined the text in its entirety, I argue that a revenge story is engineered to allow for two ludic activities. The first is for readers to solve the puzzle, a puzzle made of paper and diacritic marks on it. The second activity, possible only once the puzzle has been solved, is to play the book, as if it were a two-dimensional diorama. Let's see how we can play the third, fourth, and fifth double-page spread. You have to imagine you cannot read the book. You have to know the plot. Take up the book vertically and just perform it. So I'm going to do it with you. Okay, I need to synchronize myself with the reader. Okay, so we see Itogoro and his father Shigetayu holding down a villain in front of a derelict truck. Then we operate the book, as I'm doing, and by doing so, we see Itogoro on the left trying to open a closed door, with Shigetayu sitting outside on the right. We open the door, and Shigetayu, still outside, sees Kuro holding Saohime inside. Once we unfold the bent folio, we witness the tragedy that awaits Shigetayu. He's killed by adauchi. And once we turn the page, Kuro is running away from the crime scene. Imagine that I am performing for you what I just read. Our manual operations are what enable motion and suspense. While operating the book, we cannot read the text. As mentioned before, the text is covered by the folded paper, and this means that the reader becomes a storyteller performer, using the book as a visual prop for what becomes his or her own performance of the story. The book is designed as a sort of paper karakuri doll to be put on show in front of an audience. It is activated not by coil springs or other hidden mechanisms, but by the hands of the performer. A spectacle for the eyes with heightened emotions activated by the hands of readers turned into performers. This is what a vendetta story enacts when correctly operated. The mechanisms of the human heart and a revenge story invite readers to augment the act of reading by engaging with manual play. Both books encourage a type of physical interaction that requires more than the arbitrary turning of pages. The reader is invited to interact with flags and or to bend the pages in a specific manner at specific moments. As a rule, Samba gives us clear instructions on what to do when to work flags. In later editions, where flags are repositioned differently, those instructions become meaningless. Bokuzan is less prescriptive. The matching marks and the flags are there, but it is down to the reader to figure out what to do with them. And this cognitive engagement akin to puzzle solving adds another ludic layer to the reading experience. Both texts, albeit in different ways, encourage a form of reading that encroaches on a performance for them. The way in which I describe both books might bring to mind the idea of ergodic literature, as defined by Espen Arsen, scholar of game studies and electronic literature. Ergodic literature implies what Arsen calls non-trivial effort, with trivial effort identified in nothing more than eye movement and the periodic or arbitrary turning of pages. Ergodic literature asks for more, namely a manual intervention on the part of the reader by moving the pages in a certain way or by clicking a hyperlink. If we stopped there, then the two 1810 texts examined today would fit there. Yet, in ergodic literature, the non-trivial effort intervenes on the chain of events, changing it. By clicking on a hyperlink, you change the chain of events. By changing how the page is moved, you change the chain of events. This does not happen in Samba's or Bokuzan's work. Our manual interactions at no stage alter the chain of events. Our manual interactions enable visual change, produce surprise, elicit emotions. They encourage us to perform the text, but at no stage do our manual interactions change the course of the story. So this is no ergodic literature. But I've always been asked when I present this, well, this is ergodic literature, clearly. Well, I don't think it is. The reader, back in 1810, as today, has at least two choices. One is to ignore the open invitation to manual play. We can simply read the two texts as multimodal books. And the 1843 edition of the Mechanisms of Vision and Art does precisely that. It was never designed with facts. The other choice is to fully engage with manual play. In doing so, we embark on a deeply tactile adventure that endows us with a certain degree of creative agency. We make Takejiro visually change in the shop clock. We open the door, allowing Itogoro and Shigetayu to track down Kuro. Yet our agency is limited, as we cannot change the destiny of the protagonist beyond what Samba and Rokuzan want from them. It's very frustrating, but that's it is. For the 1810 reader, there would have been another layer of pleasure in interacting with these two books, and that is the pleasure of remediation. The 1810 reader, differently from us, and in particular the one living in the mega city of Edo, would have been au fait with the craze for quick changes on the kabuki stage. They would have enjoyed automata shows. They would have been familiar with Decoupage prints, possibly having played them as children. Samba and Rokuzan remediate these many facets of the ludic ecosystem in book form. What happens in this remediation? How do they allow for quick changes? Do these quick changes lead to responses similar to those elicited by stage performances? Engaging with these questions or similar questions must have been part of the thrill in accepting the invitation to play. And frankly speaking, they are quite lost on us unless you have the same cultural literacy that the reader in 1810 would have had. I kept talking about the 1810 reader, but you may have been thinking all along, what reader? Adult, child, male, female? Unfortunately, we have no evidence to offer a definitive answer. My answer would be both, with a preference for adult readers, with no distinction in terms of gender. And this is mainly because of the two genres, and I haven't talked about what genres they belong to, but they belong to two genres which are usually associated with an adult readership. Nothing, of course, would have precluded an adult reader from performing these movable books for an audience children in a form of communal reading that was very much the norm until the end of the 19th century. Now, these two marvels of book engineering clearly hit a chord and inspired more movable books. Hayashi Yoshikazu is the only scholar in Japan who looked at these books, and he published in 1967 Edo Shikakebon, where he lists publications with movable components, and he lists around 50 publications that came after these two books. The majority are sexually explicit materials firmly geared to an adult readership. And the Arthur Press collection here, UPenn, contains some very rare examples. I had the most entertaining day today going through all of them, and 4 of them have been chosen for you to have a look at. Some of them are particularly disturbing, in particular the one over here. Hayagawari's catalogue is an invaluable starting point to take the study of movable books in the 19th century Japan to the next stage. But really, we need to engage with these books. What movable components? By interacting with the original materials today, you realize that even fold outs, they were done in at least 3 different ways. Flaps were glued in all sorts of different ways. So how are these movable components created? What kind of movable components do they employ? To what effect? What kind of reading experience do they foster? Do they still encourage performing the text, or do they lead to a more intimate, shall we say, relation with the printed object? These questions and many others await serious engagement. Today's talk is part of an ongoing research project which is much broader. So movable books are just a very short, a very small part of them. And I tentatively call it the ecology of playthings in early modern Japan. In this project, I investigate the rich gamut of cross-pollinations that took place between various forms of play and printed culture. My project brings into dialogue media that are mostly kept separate, certainly in traditional literary histories. And in doing so, I hope to explore commercial publications that make sense only when investigated as ludic literature. So I study how these publications remediated various forms of manual play, mental play, social play, in turn further enriching the rich tapestry of playthings. Today, I argue that the emergence of movable books makes sense only when situated within a complex mediatic ecosystem, including but not limited to the kabuki stage, automata shows, and decoupage prints. The wider project applies this methodology to a wider range of playthings, asking us to recalibrate our expectations vis-à-vis the literary, is this literature, and the act of reading. And I must conclude by saying that my analysis of movable books has been inspired by the seminal work done by Professor Reid-Walsh on interactive books. I did not take the time to pause and suggest what I view as similarities or differences with Western examples, but I do hope that the contents of what I presented might have triggered some comparative reflections among other in my audience today. And I can't wait for our dialogue to start in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fascinating talk. I should have said at the beginning, for those of you on Zoom, you can put a question in the chat if you like, or you can use the raise hand function and you will be prompted to ask your question live, and we should be able to see you. Sharing.
I will stop sharing. Yeah.
There we go. If you switch us to gallery view, Peter. Okay, the floor is open for questions.
Yes.
I have, thank you so much. This was an exemplary talk, amazing material. I just completely from a different field. But I was wondering, you mentioned the rarity of the surviving examples. I mean, sometimes 3 copies of from an edition. Do we have information about the size of each sort of print run, the prices? I mean, were these, there's extra labor, as you mentioned, in the sort of construction of these, were they particularly, was it more expensive degree that would have dictated, a certain audience? And then a sort of separate question, is there any relationship with folding screens, room dividing screens, which is your second example sort of brought to mind?
Thank you very, very much. We always get these questions about prices and about print run. So first of all, unfortunately, and it is so frustrating, we have very few informations about how many copies of a book was printed. By this time, Kyokute Bakin, who was also an author of graphic narratives, has jotted down a number of thoughts about books and about authors. And in it, you find some information about some books and how many copies they're selling. If you were able to sell 1,000 prints, that was a cause for celebration. The Senbu Furumai, it was called. Whether this kind of books would have reached that number, I cannot tell. For us, it's much more interesting to understand whether there are new editions being cut, because that means that a publisher would have invested money to reproduce the same book, and that would mean that the publisher had a hunch that that would sell. Otherwise, they would not have invested money to cut new blocks and use new paper and pay new block cutters, etc. So for me, Hayagawari Mune Karakuri, I can assert that when someone says it was a big hit, I think he was right. It was a big hit. I didn't mention today, but there was also a follow-up without movable components, there were therefore a lot of sort of effect that the book had. On the prices, that is extremely frustrating. I've worked on 17th century literature for the previous project, and up until the middle of the 18th century, publishers in Edo published book trade catalogs, and in them you have prices. So we know how much a 17th century text would have cost, and we have some information about the cost of life, so you know how much they would have cost. For graphic narratives, we know, thanks to Kyokute Bakin, that one volume would have cost about 10 mon, 10 copper pieces. Now, to give you an idea, a bowl of soba would have been 16. So you either buy your bowl of soba noodles or you have a book. I know where my money would go. Whether the second book I looked at, A Revenge Story, would have been that price, though, we do not know, because you never find prices on books, which is extremely frustrating. So by the time the book trade catalogs are not produced anymore, mid of the 18th century, you stop having information about prices. Again, Kyokute Bakin gives some general ideas of how prices increase, but nothing more than that.
But I mean, a bowl of noodles, I mean, is very cheap. I mean,
And that's very
very cheap.
But that's the second text. It might have been that price, but I don't know whether the flats made it more expensive or not. Now, the books that you will see on the left-hand side, which are the Kislak books, the second book, which is really, I moved. Can I move? Yeah. Over here, this is an extremely deluxe edition, one of the best I've ever seen in my life. There is golden leaves applied, there is lacquer applied. This is an erotica book. They were the most deluxe publications. Whether, how much they cost, we have no clue whatsoever. 14 screens, I never thought about it, so I take it home as my homework. Yes.
I have a question about the one, that flat one that you have, that you showed on the right side.
Yes.
Is that a theater print, or is that one that was, I mean, I got thinking that, you know, we have a lot of the kinds of things like this with paper dolls to show, that we used to show women different designs of clothing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it was something similar here.
So I think that they are both thought as decoupage prints, because the idea is the same. You have to cut the wings and you have to cut the dresses. But some says that these were called Hayagawari bebekise. So they were, the idea is that you dress your doll differently. So probably they were cut and used as playing with a doll. Whereas this would have been inspired by the kabuki theatre, like the one I showed. So the manual intervention is the same, but here there is a vicarious experience of a play that you would have seen. You would have been really in love with this kabuki actors. They were very much like the TV, Hollywood stars or whatever. And so you buy the print, and by cutting them, you would know who the actor is. And the idea is that you have the actor in your hand and you do things with the actor. Whereas this print does not have that layer. So they are part of the same universe in terms of manual play, but they allow for a vicarious experience, which is not in here.
Would that have been more for children?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, these are normally sold as omocha e. So omocha were toys and e are images. To what extent children could also play with this? That is an interesting question, because the kabuki was also played by children. So that was also an activity that you as a child could do, and that was really very much social play. And this one is a very intriguing print because this is based on a play which is Yotsuya Kaidan. Yotsuya Kaidan is still played nowadays in Japan during the summer. If you have an opportunity to go and see it, because it has fantastic stage things. And here there is a moment where this ghost comes out from chochin, which is a lantern, and you can recreate that effect with the print. And one of your books, we need some TLC, I must say, because the flap came off, tells us that one actor, would, which was Kikonoue, sorry, I saw it this morning, Eigoro, would have played the man and the woman. At a certain point, he is dead on a piece of wood, and when the piece of wood changes, her ghost comes. And so this is what you recreate in that particular flap. So again, it's this idea of a vicarious experience of the play. Did I answer it too?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay.
Can I ask something? One of the things I love about these books, the folding one I love, because it really reminds me of Mad Magazine. Did anyone have Mad Magazine, right? And that was like the best part of the magazine, was that they have this fold, and you would fold it, you'd see the new image, and it would have some commentary, and then you would unfold it to try to see if you could still see the image, like in the. So one of the things that all of these techniques, and if I think of the analogs in Western books, it's the same. All of these techniques are playful because they make visible the aspects of the printed book that are meant typically to be transparent. So these paper, the way the codex is put together, all those parts of a book that you're not really supposed to see, you see because of these changes, and that's what's fun. And I think that's sort of different than, say, like an astronomical book that has volvels, which is not particularly fun or amusing, because it's not making visible any of that, right? It's not actually playing with the form of the printed book. So that leads me into thinking comparatively to wonder, all the things you showed are, I can think of pretty clear analogs. But given that the Japanese book is fundamentally constructed differently, the binding is different, right? The printing is different. It's a completely different, it looks like the same thing in the end. They both have the codex form, but they're quite different in the way they construct it. I wonder if there's if we can find in the playful book aspects that are really dependent on parts of the construction of a Japanese printed book that aren't really present in a Western printed book, or vice versa. So that those parts of the printing that are really different, might themselves, I don't know, the ones you show that, flaps, certainly we have flaps, folding books, it's all possible. So I don't know, maybe that's not the case, but it just made me wonder if there are parts of, there are things that just would be impossible in a European codex animal.
That's a very interesting question, and I do not have the answer. It's very interesting because, as you know, for Japanese papers, the paper is very thick. So you can only print on one side, which is a big difference with the Western book. And so then you created this pouch binding. But in the examples that I've seen so far, and the examples I've read about or seen in Western counterparts, I couldn't find anything that was specifically Japanese.
Right, I'm thinking like, could you play, you know, so the way that the book is found, you have that kind of hidden interior of what looks from Western perspective like a single leaf, you know?
Yes.
You know, that could be played with in some way, I would imagine. You're not typically supposed to pry that part open and look at the blank.
No,
Yeah.
I've never seen a book that allows you to go underneath. So the only thing that we saw today is how we saw it was a flap, but in order to insert the flap, the normal half folio had been cut, and then the flap would have been glued underneath. And I must say, I've never seen anything like that. But it's not asking you to play with the materiality of the book. I've never seen anything that is that meta. They were not asking you to reflect about what you could do with the fukurotoji binding, and therefore make you think how this was printed and bound. That did not seem to be their interest at all. In graphic narratives, you do have the example of folded pages, which actually are not folded. It is a printed thing that looks like the page has been folded, and Michael Emmerich has argued that this is extremely meta and make us think a great deal about how the book was constructed. Well, yes and no, because in a way, it's part also of the effect of surprise. I don't think there was a lot of meta things going on in terms of authorship and creation of the book, but not really binding. So in a way, they missed an opportunity that had possibly. But I repeat thinking about that.
Questions?
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I had a question about whether there are any material traces of interactions with the books, particularly, I would imagine the ones that we folded. Are there creases on the page or from where people were interacting with them?
Yes,
Yeah.
there are indeed. You have a lot of stains being created. Obviously, you have a lot of flap missing, so that it seems to me suggests they have been used to the point that the glue came simply off. The copy of the Revenge Story that is in a private collection in Tokyo, I was able to look at it very carefully, and you can actually see that the pages have been bent. And actually it's quite interesting because the paper they used was slightly thicker than the normal paper that was used, and that really allowed you to bend many times. Normally, Japanese washi paper is very stern. You can bend and it will be fine. It will not break. But they did use a slightly thicker paper for that particular project, which is quite telling. And you can actually see that it has been bent. Let's put it that way. So yes, we have traces, and unfortunately, some of them just destroyed the whole book. Yes.
Marcy, do you want to ask your question?
This is all fascinating, and I'm going to try to ask this as simply as I can. But in the West, it seems that, especially in the 19th century, historians of media change and of remediation and intermediality have tended to understand interacting media forms in terms of rivalry. But even in the 19th century itself, it seemed like many media producers did understand it, or at least position their particular media forms as rivalrous. And I'm wondering if there's that same tendency that you see in the Japanese books. I'm thinking particularly of the Hayagawari, that the hayai of the the quick change, right, is even better in this print form than in the kabuki, because you can literally just put the wardrobe change over the body, right? Whereas you know, traditional Japanese clothes, that's part of the trick of it being so fast that he's doing it, right? That he's able to make that quick change. Well, in this case, the book is not as impoverished as we usually see it in comparison to visual forms. It's actually faster. And so it can pull off the trick of being faster even more quickly than the kabuki. So I guess that's the long form of my question. The shorter form of it is do you see these books as participating in or interested in a question of not just multimedia, but media rivalry? Thanks.
I never thought really about that. It's a very interesting question. And I can only answer with a hunch today, because another very, oh my gosh, okay, there is a lot of zoom on me. A lot of frustration also comes from the fact that very few of these writers actually sat down and told us why they did all this. In Sandler's diary, you think, oh, he will tell us why it was a big hit, but he's not telling us. So there was a frustrating lack of sort of reflection on what they were trying to achieve. My hunch would be to say no, because in a way, the kabuki theatre was also producing an incredible amount of books around kabuki production. So you go and spend money to see a kabuki production, but then you go and spend money to buy the playbill, and then you spend money to buy the ehon banzuke, where you have the key scenes of that thing. We saw a few examples today, and they were all in paper. I think that to answer your question, I will need to think more about what kind of publishers were involved in what project and what kind of network of publishers were working together or not. Were the playbills for a particular kabuki play, for example, those with Ichikawa Danzu, produced by publishers that also collaborated with the publishers we have seen today? I don't have the answer, but my hunch would be there is more participation, you use that word, rather than rivalry, but I will keep thinking. So like the Byobu, this is a little bit of a takeaway for me. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't really answer, but that's all for now.
Okay, Peter, we're gonna risk audio problems, but go for it. Unmute Peter. Have your hand up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks very much for a wonderful talk, Laura. That was really fascinating. I've got a sort of two-part question. The first part is about how dolls were used in Japan. And I'm thinking about, in Europe at any rate, they were used both for children, but also as fashion to actually, you could, in the 16th and 17th century, they were actually often used for showing fashions across the world. You could transfer a doll much faster than making a complete costume. So that's the first question. And the second question, which isn't, I hope, totally unrelated, is to what extent does this opposition between adults and children, I mean, my sense is that children using scissors, particularly, often adults are involved. And so that often this is a collaborative process, even with children, even if children are using these things, they're often using them under supervision, partly for the difficulty of cutting really accurately and so on. So those are the two questions. Yeah.
I'm looking intensely at Professor Chance here, who knows more about those than I do. Those in early modern Japan, I think, were very much used on certain festivals and certain days of the year, put on display, and possibly part of the attraction was to enjoy how the dress looked. But I think it is only in the Meiji era prints, like the one I showed, they were potentially used in order to show fashion. In particular, the fashion coming from the West appears a lot in those prints. There were fashion books, hinagata-bon, but normally the kimono is presented as a flat, bidimensional surface, and you enjoy really the pattern and you do many things with that. So I don't think they were, but certainly that is another thing I want to look into. On the question about adults and children, I do take your point about being supervised. I also think that what we consider child in the West perhaps was not even conceptualized in Japan. There is a great deal of debate whether children did exist in early modern Japan. I do think that children did exist. There was a coming of age ceremony that you had to go through, which suggests that there was a time to become adults. But at the same time, it is also true that literature that could be perused by children had no attempt to sanitize them. So to sanitize the content. So the idea is that children were seen probably as little adults, and that also adds to the flux between the two. So if I probably need to really reformulate my idea, my question of adults or readers. It was much blurred, and I do take your point, and I will certainly fine-tune that. Again, what is really frustrating in that the majority of the diaries that survive from the 19th century, they tell us about all sorts of things, political, scandals, and all sorts of societal issues, but they don't really take the time to tell us, I sat down with this book and I enjoyed it for this. There is one example that talks about graphic narratives, Haishisho is called, but it's for a very limited amount of graphic narratives produced from 1775 till the 1800s. I cannot find anything that answers your question with some evidence. Sorry, it was a very long-winded answer, but I hope I did answer.
Thank you, Laura. This is so fascinating. Small thing and really big thing. The flaps.
Yes.
Those are single sheets, right? There's a little block to make a little flap. It's a small piece of paper compared to the quote-unquote regular size. I guess that's not a great technical challenge. It just means a sort of little bit of difference in production, and not a big deal, but still just interesting. It's like a sort of a physical, functional difference. I am curious as to why that later edition, the 1853 one, why did they screw it up? Why didn't they just do it? You interpret it as if there's a, it allows you to do something, but it sounds like they just messed it up. So that's the more that we can say about the physicality of these flaps is interesting to me. And the really big thing, it sounds like your project also is tackling public and private, of course, in a really big way. And I know, and they're the experts in the room here, that the subject of erotica in Japanese printing is a huge and complicated one. But I wondered if you could say a little more about this move from what these sort of performative texts that come out of a theatrical tradition, at least in part of what you're saying, to what we see on the table here by the later 19th century, the flap book as being the joke in the Western case is the books you read with one hand, or the intimate, private erotics. So it's a very different kind of movability, so to speak. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question actually got me really intrigued today because you have such an array of movable books, which is fascinating. And actually, the flaps are put together in different ways. So, for example, even in, and then please feel free to touch my own edition. In that case, the flap with the skeletons, the text and the skeletons behind, is actually printed as one flap, and then it is folded and then glued. But all the others, so you could not screw that up because it is printed. It is printed on one sheet. You fold it and you glue it. The others were printed on 4 different small sheets, and then they were glued onto each other. That's why they got put out of place. Now, why did the publisher didn't take use really his brain and read Samba's instruction on how to use it? That troubles me as well. But I think that it is because they were discrete, small pieces glued on top that they could be misplaced. Some of the examples that I saw this morning were very interesting because even the fold-outs, we have seen 3 different types of fold-outs. One is a fold-out where you have not 2 folios that normally would be what you print and then you fold outside. There are 3 folios, 2 bent in the middle inside, and then 1 bent outside, and then glued to a half folio. So these are very interesting books because we always think it is a folio bent in the middle and then stacked up and stitched. But these actually really bend the idea of the fukuro toji. Other examples are done differently with the normal 2 folios bent inside and then half a folio glued. So all the fold-outs are made differently. And I think that this is an aspect that Hayashi Yoshikazu didn't even write 1 word about. And I think that that should become part of any publication about these movable books. Because yes, it is the same fold-out, but actually is done in a very different way. So yes, it is very intriguing. I think a lot of work needs to be done in order to clarify how these movable components were made. The other
public-private or
public and private. So on my project so far, I really have concentrated on these early books. Also because the erotica ones are quite difficult to track down. There is a database, some of them we could compare with other digital images, but a lot of them are simply not available. And some are in private collections.
They're still private.
So
okay.
they're still private. So I'm still starting to think about them. But again, I think that it's not just about the image, it's also trying to understand, read, and what is happening. So, are they all about the genitalia, the surprise? I don't think so. Some of them allows you to open up entire edifices. So there is a private collection in the UK that has one where you open, and then you open another floor, and then you have a 3rd floor. And that is not really just because you're using the other hand doing something else. And so how do you use that as materials? That's really the question. So I'm not entirely convinced that it's just, oh yes, let's go to the naughty part. But again, there are over 40 titles, and so little by little is really engaging with that and trying to answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, we have time for one more question, I think.
This is kind of less a question and more like a malformed quick thought, but our discussion today, like the question about Bilbo and the discussion of erotica, made me think about kind of like connection between architecture of these books and actual architecture, because in erotica, I think a lot of examples that I've seen, these flaps actually imitate architectural features, like somebody is looking through a peep like in the wall, and then we kind of open that wall, or like you were talking about floors. So kind of thinking about this 3-dimensional architecture and connection to kind of Japanese architecture, maybe that prompts this kind of
Yes.
architecture.
Again, to what extent it is an architectural feature being used and to what extent it isn't, that's a very interesting question. Again, there are architectural manuals, and unfortunately they do not use movable parts as far as I know, which seems a missed opportunity. But certainly one thing to think about is what kind of, like today, you could open the door of yourself, of the shrine. And at the very end of the jewel scene, actually had a lot of flaps. And a lot of flaps will allow you to open doors, to open the fence, to let people in. So I like your idea of looking at the architectural elements, and that certainly, together with how actually they were made, what also they made you imagine that you would open or move. It's a very interesting question, so I will add that to the to-do list.
Well, why don't we stop there and people can explore the books if you're, at least without too much touching. If you're on Zoom, we can try, if you want to stay on the Zoom for a minute, we can try to make our fancy new room camera zoom in on the books a little more and see if we can actually show some of it to you. I think you might get
Thank you.
it.